Well, good afternoon to you. My name is Christy McDonald. I'm with Channel 4, and welcome to the campus of Oakland University and our very first town hall in our joint partnership here with the Center for Civic Engagement here at Oakland University. I'm so glad that we're all here today and having a really important conversation about disinformation, misinformation surrounding the election season, and we have a really great two members of our panel here to have this discussion today. Of course, Dave Dulio, professor of political science here and head of the Center for Civic Engagement. We started having these conversations about what would be really valuable to talk about surrounding this election season, since there's so much, I think, what we can call noise from time to time, and we thought that zeroing in on this would be a really excellent way to start this series of three conversations. And of course, in bringing in Erin Myers, who's a professor of communications here, and she also specializes in social media analysis, really going to be lending a lot of expertise to this conversation. So I'm so glad that you're here. I know that you have some students, that are going to be coming here for extra credit, right?
Yes.
I feel like we saw the sign-up sheet already go around. Who's coming here to get a little bit extra credit from professors' classes?
There we go.
And of course, they're sitting in the back. So.
Right. So are the other folks from the OU community that, you'd think that they would learn from their time in school. Everybody in the back come up. There's plenty of seats in the front.
Plenty of seats, which is really great that we're here at the Oakland Center, and you see a lot of the students that are around, and this is actually a break between classes, which is why we really wanted to do it at this time as well. So we're going to start this conversation that I think that a lot of people are having already on their social media, their Facebook page, on Instagram, and they're having them on at their kitchen tables with their family members. We bring it here and talk for a little bit about what we've been seeing in this election cycle as compared to years past. And then we're going to open it up to you. So it's not just going to be us sitting here and talking at you. We want to get some interaction. And so if you have any questions, kind of stemming off some of the things that you're hearing right now, in about 20 minutes or so, I'm going to grab a stick mic and we'll kind of work through the crowd. And so make sure that if you've got something that you want to add, make sure you just raise your hand and stand up, and we'll get you into the conversation. I just ask that be respectful of all of our various opinions. And we know that this season is fraught with a lot of opinions. So I think it's going to be a great conversation, as Dave smiles widely. That's an understatement. But I would love to really just, I think, start and kick things off when we talk about disinformation, misinformation, everything that is surrounding the way we are seeing campaigns and the way that we're getting information this campaign season. And start with you, Dave, and talk broadly. What are the biggest things that you're seeing that maybe you're concerned with or that you notice are very different from 4 years ago in 2020?
First of all, Christy, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We're delighted to have the partnership with Channel 4 and to be able to take the expertise that we have on campus here out through the Local 4 Plus streaming platform. We're really excited about moving forward. When I think about misinformation and disinformation, I think it's important to remember that it's been around forever. It has been part of discourse. It's been part of campaigning, probably in different ways. We've seen for decades, one candidate's campaign will take something out of context about another candidate, whether it be a particular vote that they may have taken as a member of the House or Senate, or some statement that they've made, and try to make a lot of hay out of that in their campaign. And that continues today, but it has just proliferated. And then we see the injection of artificial intelligence and deep fakes and those sorts of things. That, I think, is probably the biggest difference that I notice in the last 4 years. But Erin's really the expert on information in this discussion.
Yeah, Erin, you specialize in studying social media and the changes that we've seen. What would you say when people are asking you, Erin, does this seem crazier than it was 4 years ago? What would you say to that?
Well, I would agree with Dave that media is a tool, right? It helps us do things, and as we've seen more proliferation of media platforms and ways that we can communicate, we see the easier and quicker spread of content everywhere. So the kinds of things that you used to wait for the nightly news or the newspaper, now you're getting instantly. So I think that's coupled with the fact that we've also got everyday people have the ability to make and share things all the time. So I think that that's really what we're seeing in terms of the explosion. It's not that there's more attention to misinformation, from the candidates or from the political parties, but rather the ability to spread it faster has brought it more to our attention.
And I think it's really interesting the way that campaigns are using it as well, and where they see the ability to communicate with a voting audience that they maybe then can bypass the regular media. And we're going to go through that and what the role is of the media in all of this and how we're fact-checking what we put on our air as well. But Erin, I want you to start us off so we all have the same baseline of what we're talking about. What is misinformation? What is disinformation, and the difference between the two?
Great question. So I think the main difference that we want to think about is about intent. That when we think about misinformation, we can think about a large number of falsehoods, rumors, images that are taken out of context, all these kinds of things that get shared. Those are the things that people are just sharing and not necessarily thinking about it. Oh my gosh, did you see this? This fired up my, dopamine, and so I'm going to send it out to other people. Yeah. But the disinformation is when it's intentional, that you are sharing things with the intention to disrupt, to mislead people. But the intention itself doesn't diminish the power of that information. So even misinformation that's perhaps blindly shared or shared in a way not intending to proliferate certain perspectives or ways of thinking or rumors, then gets, the cycle just keeps continuing as people keep sharing it. So the effect might be the same, but I think when we think about the difference, the disinformation is when you think about, troll farms and things like that are manufacturing with the intention to mislead people, as opposed to everyday people that are just continuing to spread things as part of our everyday social media use.
Gosh, that makes me think, is there any way to even figure out or quantify that? Say, are we seeing more or this, or is there any way?
It's hard to say because misinformation can even include things like satire. Some people are going to get it and some people aren't, right? So does that mean it was a misleading rumor if someone forwards something from, say, The Daily Show, but someone takes it seriously? That's another issue that you would have in terms of quantifying it.
So it all comes down essentially how we assess things. And I would think that that would then go to the root of then trust in terms of what our point of view is and what we see and then what we take in and say, oh, well, I believe that to be true.
No doubt. And I think that intention certainly matters, perspective and how somebody else perceives that information. And I think the trust, I imagine, also comes from whether you like the information that you're receiving or not, right? I mean, if something is, because we all like our information bubbles, right? We all like our warm, fuzzy, cozy, non-challenging
well, it reinforces the narrative that we feel that we believe.
We all like confirmation bias, right? We all fall victim to that. But when you are receiving stuff that you agree with, you're more likely to trust it. Versus if you are getting some counter information, maybe you're more likely to challenge it or say, oh, I don't believe that. And maybe that's an excuse, right? Oh, that's misinformation, right? When maybe it's not. Maybe it's real, right?
What are some of the detrimental effects that we're seeing this election cycle, Erin, of the disinformation that's out there?
Well, I think we could talk about a wide range of issues, but we got to go right to Springfield, Ohio, in my opinion. I mean, we're seeing very real-world problems happening for the people that live there. Buildings being shut down, bomb threats to schools, because people keep spreading this. And again, is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? People reinforcing their own confirmation bias, like, well, of course this is true because this reaffirms how I view the world, and we share it, and it keeps going, even though we've had multiple city officials repeatedly say this is not happening, and yet we are continuing to have these problems.
Well, and I think, you get to intent, right? And J.D. Vance, even the other day, said, well, I made it up. He said, I create things when I need to get somebody's attention. When we only got the media's attention after we started talking about this, right? So it was almost an admission, or it was an admission of creating something for a strategic purpose in the campaign.
I mean, is that something different that we've never seen before? That someone will openly admit and say, "I was trying to gin up a little bit of controversy and a little bit of attention."
I wonder if he'd take it back if he had a second shot at that comment. Because nobody wants to admit that they've made a mistake, that they've done something that is unseemly, right? I think that's, or maybe it's just refreshing. I don't know. Maybe he's just caught him in an honest moment.
I think what's really interesting is then that brings me to the point of how, like, the long tail that things can have on social media and how impactful one snippet, one comment can be. I mean, we saw what happened real world in Springfield in terms of schools being shut down and threats out there. But Aaron, when you talk about how effective a campaign can make out of one clip on social media, that is something I believe that is even drastically different than we saw in 2020.
I think so. I mean, we've been seeing the effect of social media for a while. I'm thinking back to the Howard Dean scream, and that was something that went viral at what was considered viral at the time, and it ended his campaign, right? Compared to now, we're in this different landscape where I think because we're so enmeshed in this everyday soup of misinformation, if you will, that we tend to just believe what we believe instead of using some critical media literacy to think about how we're getting our information and who's behind it.
Yeah, and we can come up with all kinds of examples from history in terms of misinformation, at least how I would examine it, right, that have had huge effects, huge impacts on campaigns, on governing, right? I mean, and I'll give you one from each party, right?
Okay.
In 2004, John Kerry was running for president, and he had a bunch of ads come out against him from the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, who questioned his service in the armed forces. And turns out, years later, that wasn't all accurate, right? But those ads had a huge impact on the outcome of that race. And then on the other side, you just go back to 2017 and the Russia collusion accusations against Donald Trump, right? That turned out not to be the case, but that was ginned up and it was shared, throughout the country for months and months and months, right? So, and had a huge impact on his presidency.
Yeah, I mean, and you're even getting into, I mean, the John Kerry example was something that was happening internally here, but when you start looking at other countries that are now trying to meddle in our election, I mean, there are a couple of instances happening right now as well in terms of fake video from Russia trying to plant information, Iran trying to plant information about Donald Trump that media sources did not pick up on. But Aaron, when you look at all of this in the stew that we're in right now, where do we need to stop and start to vet what we're seeing, and how do we do that?
Right, that's the hard part, because when we're using social media, we're not necessarily putting on our, media literacy cap, so to speak. We're looking at it for fun, or we're looking at it for entertainment. But even as a part of that, we need to think about, where did this information come from? Who's the source of where I'm getting it? Or where did that person who tweeted it or whatever get it?
Why don't we ever stop? Why is it so immediate? It feels like people are just like, oh, great, click.
Well,
Aunt Mary said
the
this.
platforms,
Awesome.
the platforms aren't designed that way, right? I mean, I know we have things like community notes on X now and things like that that are supposed to help us fact check, but they're not designed for that. They're designed to keep us scrolling and keep us interested in looking at more and more, so that the longer we stay on the app, the more they can mine data from us and the more advertisements we're going to see.
What's the onus on Meta, on X, to police some of the information?
For me, I think it's a heavy onus. I think that they should be absolutely putting on greater filters to make sure that things are transparent in terms of, where did this come from? What's the context? A lot of times we see things circulating for misinformation that are pictures that aren't even from that thing, like in Springfield with the man walking with two geese. That wasn't in Springfield. That wasn't right now. That was picked up on the side of the road, which is a legal thing to do, where he is in Columbus, Ohio, but it just kept circulating and circulating and jumping platforms, and next thing you knew, we have the President of the United States, or the former president rather, talking about it during a debate. So it's just that, to stop and question for a moment, why is this showing up here, and who is really posting that, right? If I'm just sharing something, am I sharing it because it's making me excited to share information, or do I really know something about the truth of what I'm sharing?
Yeah, or you're really trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah.
And what we do about it is really the hard question. Does the onus fall on Meta, on X, on TikTok, right? Or does it fall with the government? We've seen California take quite a step in the last week or so. Gavin Newsom signs this bill into law that says, if you do this, that's breaking the law. If you share misinformation, no, that's, I think, and I'm no attorney, right? But that seems like
Come on,
it has,
Dave, add that to the list.
That has no chance of standing up in court, right? That because we don't know that, right?
Right.
I mean, somebody might just think it's funny.
Right, but not here, whereas in the UK, they have much stricter rules, and so people can
Most
be.
definitely,
Yeah.
and they have been, right? And there's almost a clampdown of speech, right? And the First Amendment here, of course, is something that is intertwined into all of this.
So it goes back to how effective information with campaigns, because again, campaigns are putting out ads and their PACs are putting out ads, and we're seeing them all the time, and especially here in Michigan, aren't we lucky? We are definitely one of the battleground states. Not only are we getting candidate visits, which I would say go and see candidates. We have the opportunity, go and listen, because we are lucky. We are in one of the places where the candidates are coming, but we are also hit with ads and every single commercial break. And you will see this on local news. I mean, we've expanded content to even be able to take in all of the ads that we're seeing right now. So Dave, talk to us a little bit about some of the ads that we're seeing, even maybe in local races. You know, we've got this open Senate seat here in Michigan. And then how can we look at them with a critical eye and, again, know what to believe?
Yeah, I think it's always good to try to look at a campaign ad through a critical lens of, all right, who is paying for this to be on the air, right? And so who's the sponsor? And what's their agenda? What are they trying to do? And does that agenda maybe color some of the information that's being presented, right? There are dozens of different advertisements on the air now between the presidential race, the Senate race, a U.S. House race that's competitive here in the Oakland County, Macomb County area, John James and Carl Morlinga. You know, everybody's got an agenda, and it's not just the candidates, it's the campaigns. What are they trying to do with that? And are they, you know, if it's an ad about John James's record, it's probably coming from Carl Morlinga or one of his allies. Of course, they want to beat John James, right? So, you know, maybe ask yourself, okay, how do I analyze that? Through the lens of that's a Marlinga attack ad, right? And maybe do I have to take that with a grain of salt? There's what has been a really good thing in the last decade or so is the addition of evidence or citation, if you will, in these advertisements. And there's usually a little bit of information about what bill number they're talking about, what newspaper article they're citing. You know, if you can find that, go look at it, right? Because chances are there's going to be even more information in that source material than just what that 30-second ad is telling.
Or that clip from YouTube, you know, or that, you know, sometimes they're using sound like that. Is that go to what our own critical thinking skills are, Aaron, and how we take things in, and we have to slow down and stop.
Absolutely. I mean, you can take any clip and put different music on it and make ominous lighting and completely change what the person is saying or the tone of it. And that's before we even start to talk about deep fakes, where they actually fake what the people are saying.
Right.
But that's a great point to think about, you know, who's behind this. When it's you know, for a particular candidate, they have different rules compared to what the PACs have. And that's really important, and something that I think we should think about in terms of misinformation and disinformation in politics is that when we have a system that allows, you know, all this money to be paid or used by these PACs without it being very clear who it is they're exactly attached to.
You know, I also think it's interesting to bring up that we have to bring up the role of media in everything that we're seeing as well. And, you know, that puts us in the spotlight, you know, as well. I can't sit here and have a conversation with you about disinformation, misinformation, and all of the images that we're seeing without saying, the news and what we're able to put on the air is definitely has a part in it. And when, you know, you're talking to your students about that and some of the critical things that they're thinking about with media, what are some of the things that they're saying to you? And then maybe I can share a little bit about what our process is in terms of when we talk about equal time and when we talk about covering how we cover the races, and especially, you know, where we're at right now.
I think it goes back to trust, right? And I think a lot of people want to know, can I trust? You know, seeds of doubt have been sown everywhere, right? So not just with the combatants in an election, right, but the other sort of peripheral actors like the press, and as you know well, right, the decline in the trust of the media is palpable these days, and I think a lot of not just students but folks in the electorate are saying, okay, you're telling me this, but how do I trust that? And if you're a fact checker, well, who's fact checking the fact checkers? You know, and where does that end, right? And
I think I think it's really interesting, and just from the perspective of local media, we do see all of the surveys and how polarizing people think. Well, CNN leans this way, MSNBC leans this way, Fox News leans this way. So when people are actually polled about local media, they actually have a higher trust value in it because we are more grassroots, right in the community where you live in. I think that that's our role at this point, is to make sure that we're covering the local races and we're covering what people actually think. And it's harder when we see the national election. We see national media come into Michigan and cover the races, in a bit of a different way or a different perspective. Our thing is that we have always tried to make sure that we cover all sides of the story. That doesn't mean that we give platform to untruths, to things that are not factually correct. We will fact check things, in a story, but we do make sure that voices are heard and perspective, and then we will challenge both sides on that and ask questions to both sides on
Can
that.
I turn the moderator table
Yes.
on you and ask you a
Now
question?
I'm starting to sweat. Go.
So how, in an era of shrinking resources in the media
Yeah.
business, there's so much more. We know that there's more of this out there. How does Channel 4 take on that really growing role of trying to be this neutral arbiter? And two, and maybe a specific example, sometimes we see candidates send cease and desist orders to television stations to say, hey, this ad contains a falsehood, take it down from the air. How do you deal with that?
Well, I knew that you were going to ask about that, and I wanted to make sure that everybody had that good information, like when someone comes and says, hey, we don't believe the claims that are in an ad that is running on your air. And I asked our general manager, Bob Ellis, and I was like, look, give me what's the inside process, because some of those decisions when it comes to ads on the air are made at a different level from where the journalists are working in the newsroom.
Sure.
So I wanted to tell you what Bob said to me. He said, we often hear from ad agencies about the validity of claims made in ads by the opponent. We have a process where we obtain documentation to support the claims that are being made. If that's sufficient, we run it. If it's not, we pull it. So that's kind of what is made on that level. In terms of our resources in the newsroom, there is you guys know that newsrooms have gotten smaller. And we know that's happened at print. We know that's happened at television. It's happened in radio. But when we're looking at an election season, we go every day, especially now, right, where we are in this time right before November, and say, what do we need to cover today and how do we need to cover it? And we have multiple people who are ready to cover it. It's not just like, oh, we have a candidate visit today. Let's just send a camera out there. It's a very deliberate decision, and then we talk about how it's going to be covered. So it's not just a campaign ad for whoever that candidate is who rolls into town. That there has to be some question about why is this happening, who is there, what is the main thrust of that conversation, because we know every candidate who's coming in is like, we're talking about the auto industry today. Okay, what aspects of it? Who are the people there? Who are the people outside that are protesting? Just in terms of making sure that you get all of that. You know that Devin has Flashpoint on Sunday mornings. That has been a roundtable for politics. That has also been a place for one-on-one conversations. And that, and I've done some of those as well, that you make sure that you ask the candidates or you give them the same X amount of questions and then are able to ask them and push them to answer. We all know that sometimes the candidates will answer only what they want to answer. Who's seen the presidential debates?
Yeah, right.
And it sometimes can be hard for a moderator to keep pushing on one point, knowing that it's taking away time on the back end from 5 other things that you want to make sure that you get to, but it is very valuable. Before we open it up to questions from you guys so we can kind of get into this conversation, Erin, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to jump on and make sure that we knew about?
Well, I would say, just to kind of jump off of what you're talking about with the idea that we need to spend 50-50 time. And I agree that we need to be examining all sides of the issue, and I think what you're saying about the local coverage is great. But I think another problem with perhaps the trust in the media that people are seeing is that we see, this attention to lie after lie after lie in some cases just made as, oh, well, his miswording or his misunderstanding. The fact checking is happening, but it's not happening or being reported then in a forceful way of like, no, this is not true. This is a false statement. This is a lie. But we tend to use we see used more wishy-washy language in this pursuit of, both-sidism.
In pursuit of both-sidism or the equal time. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Anything else you want to add before we open it up?
Oh, let's get the, I'm anxious to know what the
Let's get to
folks
the
who
people.
are here
All
wanna
right,
know
good
about.
stuff. So I'm going to grab the microphone. And is there anyone who wants to start us off with a question or a comment or anything like that? Don't make me be a lounge singer up here. Don't do that. Don't do that to me. Hi. Why don't you go ahead and stand up and tell us who you are and where you're from?
My name's Kayla. I'm a journalism student at Oakland University.
Okay.
So I know earlier you mentioned the word deepfake. I was just wondering if we could get a definition on that and how it's used in political content.
That's a great question. Erin, that's going straight to you. We're talking about deepfakes.
Sure.
Yep.
Deepfakes is the use of technology, particularly AI, to create images that don't even exist, right? So we can take an image of a candidate and have them saying something that they never actually said, because we can take existing samples of their voice, talking in other places, of their body, their mouth movements, and make it look so real that it's like that person is actually saying those things. So it's incredibly hard for the average person to recognize something as a deep fake. So when I say, check your sources, sometimes that's a huge challenge. But it's often one way to think about challenging deep fakes is to think about, where else am I seeing this, right? Am I only seeing this clip that's this, suddenly horrible thing that seems like it should be big news on one kind of site, or am I seeing it lots of places that are official spaces, not just people retweeting it on X? But so the deep fakes are just a way to create something that never existed in the first place.
Are there any kind of clues when we were looking at video like that? I know that people have said to me, like, look at details. Like if you look at really specific details of people's hands, if they're not moving correctly, or their chin, like underneath their face, like it moves in a weird way in terms of the AI is not able to be perfect on some of those things.
Yes, there's sometimes a bit of the uncanny valley where it seems almost too real, if that makes sense, that it's kind of unsettling in its realness, if you will, that can be a way to start to point out, this doesn't seem like it's legitimate. And then you can look, where else did I see this candidate? If this is supposed to be candidate X in Detroit, let's go and find other footage of that person talking in Detroit, and did we see them saying those same things? Because if someone's making some explosive comment, you should be seeing it in more than just one place.
But again, the way that we interact with this information on a handheld device, and we're scrolling quickly, right? You can miss some of those details, and that's the really hard part about almost training yourself to slow down, and in a era when everything is sped up, right? Slow down, look at the sources, try to get it confirmed, right, with multiple reports, and who's going to do that today? Right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so easy to fall victim to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Who else? Somebody else have a question that they want to add. Hi. Hang on, let me run back here. I'm Phil Donahue for you today. That's what I am. Come on, stand up and tell. Three people laughed, so they remember Phil Donahue. What's your name?
My name is Linda,
Okay,
and
Linda.
I live in Sterling Heights. And I'm wondering, as we're facing all this social media, is there a diminished value on truth? I can remember when you never wanted to be called a liar, or worse yet, a perpetual liar. And I'm not finding people being appalled and by misinformation or disinformation anymore. In the last couple of years, it's gotten worse. So is there a diminished value on the quest for truth?
It's a very philosophical
that's a
question. Who
great
wants to pick up
question.
on that? It's a great question. Go ahead, Dave.
I don't. Maybe. I mean, that's a terrible answer. Maybe. And I say that only because this is the past on steroids. And here's the first thing that comes to mind for me is negative ads, right? For decades, Americans have protested against negative ads. We don't like negativity. We don't like it when one candidate goes after the other, right? And honestly, there's misinformation, or there can be misinformation in those negative ads. Yet, they remain around, and in fact, it's probably only gotten more prevalent. And the reason for that is those ads work, right? Those campaigns would not spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on those kinds of communications if they didn't work. So my point to you is, right, this use of misinformation or disinformation in a strategic way works, right? It revs up the base on both sides. It revs up people's enthusiasm for their candidate, which is what those candidate needs come time to cast a ballot.
I would say that we should always still expect the truth from our media outlets. I mean, from my perspective, we should never let up on that. We should never let that slide for the places that we're getting our information and the valuable information that we're using to make serious decisions about the way we live. So I would at least still say from my perspective, the media perspective, that you should hold us to that high standard still. Anybody else have a question? I got a couple questions too, but I'm coming over to you. Hi, what's your name?
George Gomez, Royal Oak.
Okay.
I really appreciate you bringing out earlier what it really says about us when we read something or we watch something, and how we immediately go right to that issue, either negatively or in such a hateful way. And it just seems to be so quick now. And I don't think enough of us slow down, as you said, to really look at something, not just for today, as we speak in a university, but when they graduate and they go to raise a family, we don't stop to look at the long term of what they're discussing. They do the sound bites, like we're going to pay for this for free today. Well, 10 years from now, when that bill comes due, I don't think we talk about it enough.
Thank you, George. I think that's really interesting. It lends to the larger question of how do we talk, especially now in these next couple of weeks when we see things on social media and people say, oh no, this is true. How do we have these conversations?
It's incredibly challenging because I think there's a lot of ways that I think media plays a role. I think other parts of society play a role in creating and reestablishing divisions all the time, right? That we want to get in our little filter bubbles. We want to believe that we're right and the other side is wrong, and that it's not just that I don't agree with you, but that you are wrong and that I need to kind of be adversarial. And I think that gets reinforced on social media and other kinds of spaces too. I don't want to put all the blame on the media. And so I think that's playing a big role in it too. Back to the question about truth as well, that what your truth is becomes the only truth, and you can't accept. And my students know we've talked about the idea of freedom of speech is supposed to be about the willingness to engage in open debate and dialogue, and the willingness to accept that you might be wrong, because if you believe you're right, then you just believe you're infallible, and no one is infallible. So every falsehood might have some truth in it, but we can't know that till we all talk about it. So to your question, I think we need to talk about these things even when they're uncomfortable, and that you need to talk to people in a way that makes sense to them and not just come at them with a, well, here's why you're wrong and I'm right, and let's just move on from there.
Yeah, I would say two things. Number one, I'll go back to a phrase that Aaron used before, media literacy, right? I think that everybody, including the most ardent, news reader and attention payer, right, could always beef up their media literacy. And I think too that well, heck, we're on a college campus. This is the place where you can come to get that skill, right? There's a lot of questions today, and rightly so, about the value of college, the value of a university education. Well, this is one of those instances that isn't tied necessarily to a career path. But boy, is it important to have as a citizen and as a member of a participating in a democratic system, right? And I would also say that that's what we try to do with the Center for Civic Engagement. You mentioned it, right? Not just argue at each other or dig in on your position, but be able to have a discussion about an important topic, and do it in a civil and respectful way. So, you can get that when you come to a place like OU, and that's really important, to be able to build those skills so that you are prepared to interact with these incredibly important and vexing questions.
Yeah. Anybody else? Hi there. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Dave from Keego Harbor, and first of all, thank you all for putting this on. This is really good. How do we find out more truths? The quest for truth. I'd like to know more about the whole everybody's stance on everything, but I'm not going to get it from them, if you know what I mean. So how do we get that? And some ideas, like a university or the news, I would trust, as a grassroots type of educational process. How can you educate us more on just the facts, just the stance, like what's, popular issues like abortion, what's that person's stance, what's that person's stance? And we can go through all the issues. And I know sometimes newspapers put that out.
Yeah.
That tends to be a one-on-one process. Is there a way we can do more educating of people with them together like this? I don't want to be educated over a TV screen. I want to be educated in a group. And I think we've heard that before from kindergarten to here, right? How do we do that? I would trust if Oakland University put something on that said here, these are the facts about 2024. From the presidential standpoint, from the state standpoint, I'd watch it if it took 2 hours on Channel 4. So I think to her quest, the quest for truth, we can't get enough of it. We can't get to it fast enough, and we can't get to it in a reasonable process where we understand it. So I know it was a long discussion, but you guys have prompted a lot of good questions and ideas, but this is my best one coming out.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. All right, we have a new job for you now, Dave. Get on that.
Okay, yeah. I think we do all sorts of stuff here. This new partnership with WDIV is going to help provide information for voters, for viewers, for folks who come and check it out, right? I think it is a personal problem, a personal solution, right? You can go and research for hours and hours and hours and still not get to all of it, right? I think it's in some sense we're conditioned to expect the least. And a lot of times I think that comes from television commercials, mail pieces that come in say, State House race, around these issues that are incredibly complex and incredibly subtle, right? Where you're never going to get to the full truth, maybe to use a phrase, right? In a 30-second commercial. You're probably never going to get it in a 2-hour program on Channel 4, right? These issues about whether it's immigration, inflation in the economy, abortion, et cetera, right, are so incredibly complex and nuanced that it takes hours and hours and hours to delve into them, right? So, I wish everybody was like you and would commit to a 2 or 3 hour session on one issue, right? I think that that everything is fast today is a hurdle in trying to do that.
Yeah. I would agree with that, and that the pressure to feel like you have to be perfect, right? You have to know everything, you have to get every piece of information, but there's lots of ways that these complex issues can be addressed beyond just here's a fact sheet, right? Listening to people's stories, listening to people, not even just the candidates, right, but the people who are affected by those kinds of issues, listening to what they say about how it impacts their lives or what it means for them to think about, no taxes on tips or protecting women's reproductive health. That these are things that matter more than I think just listening to the people who are running for the office, but to see how it works in people's everyday lives. And even those are the conversations that sometimes we can't have, right? That seems adversarial, that I shouldn't talk to my neighbor about these topics, but I think you should, and that it should just be normalized to just talk about these kinds of things all the time, not constantly, but that it should be part of what we do every day.
I'll take that a step further, right? I think a lot of people think they can't talk to their neighbor about it because they're afraid that if they open themselves up to, hey, I think this, that oh my gosh, they're gonna be hated by their neighbor, lose a friendship, lose the comity that they have, in their neighborhood, right? Nobody wants to have that happen. People, I think, have this deep fear about sort of opening up about their beliefs and attitudes, and that's bad for our society, that's bad for our culture, it's certainly bad for our politics.
Right, and they say, oh, I don't want to talk politics, but it's not just politics, and I think we've been conditioned to think that it is.
Yeah.
It's just life, and that we need to talk about it.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question before I wrap things up? Hi, sir. What's your name?
Barry.
Barry?
For the panelists, can you tell me why half of this country continues to believe that the election in 2020 was stolen with no evidence whatsoever, gone through court case after court case? So speaking to her letter, definitely trust has been enormously diminished. And I'd like to know, I know you're a Republican, Dave, I'd just like to know
I am?
why. That's right. 50% still, 4 years later, don't believe, or believe that is, that the election was stolen. Why do you think this has persisted for so long?
I
Thanks,
think
Barry.
people today are unwilling to say that they've made a mistake. I think people are more unwilling today to admit that they were wrong, right? I mean, because that would indicate weakness of some kind, right? That it would sort of drop them down in some people's esteem, if you will, and that's bad, right? That's just for our life, right? You got to be able to admit a mistake, but the stakes seem so high on some of this stuff for some people that they just dig in. They just dig in because somebody that they like told them something and they're not breaking free from it.
Right. I mean, it's a question of the role of leadership, too, right? If you're talking about leaders that won't admit that these things are true, then you're talking about people that believe in that because we are incredibly divided and ingrained and entrenched in those divisions, that there's some sort of identity in that, right? That people are more likely to identify around their political parties now than other categories of identity. And that becomes a way to hold on to that identity and refusing to admit that there could be anything wrong or that your belief could be wrong. So, I mean, I don't have an answer. I share your quandary about how the world works, but that I think these deeply held divisions are just becoming so much a part of who we are, and if we aren't seeing that modeled to us of the willingness to talk or to admit mistakes, then why would you ever do that?
And real quick, we've seen this in other instances or other contexts, and folks have talked about it in terms of people have sort of retreated to their tribes, to their teams, right? And there really is this almost sports metaphor that has taken over, right? That we're on different teams, and there's no way that I can, cross over to the dark side, right? And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. All right, as we start to wrap up today, and again, we really appreciate you being here for this conversation. Of course, you watching at home on Local 4 Plus and clickondetroit.com. I want to ask both of you and kind of wrap it up for us in this way. What should we be watching these next several weeks before the election in November? Erin, let me start with you.
I think be mindful of the attack ads like we talked about. Think about what is the goal, who's the author, and what's the goal of this attack ad that's coming out. Same idea when you're thinking about social media. Who is this for? How are they trying to get my attention? How are they trying to inflame my passions around a particular issue or make me feel connected to a particular issue? And for what purpose, right? So I think just take everything with about 80 grains of salt.
Dave, last word.
I hate to say it, but don't trust anybody, right? I mean, the big thing about this is trust, but don't trust
great,
anybody.
Dave.
Because I know, right? Everybody's got an agenda in politics, right? And they're always trying to angle at something. So the 80 grains of salt, let's start with that and maybe add a few hundred more.
I would say pop into the critical thinking skills, do your research. Yeah. And feel that you've sourced it in a number of ways, and don't be so quick to believe the first thing that you hear. But again, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot today, and I know that you've been able to give people a lot of things to think about. So I want a big round of applause for Erin Myers and Dave Giulio. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. So this is our first of 3 town halls that we'll do right here at the Oakland Center, and we'll see you back here in October, where we're going to be looking at some of the top issues on the voters' minds here in Michigan. We hear a lot of things, about the rest of the U.S., but what specifically is on the minds here for us? We'll talk about that, and then come back and see us in November after the election when we say, now what's going to happen? So it'll be a good one. So I want to thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And again, if you want to watch this back or share it with friends, say, I was there live. We're going to have it for you tonight at 8 o'clock on Local 4 Plus, and click on Detroit.com. You can share it from there, and you can watch it back. So we appreciate your time and your attention. You guys have a great day. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.